Hello, and a very warm welcome to Keynote's Expert Voices. In today's podcast, we tackle a very interesting topic: diversity in the future of work. Before we begin, allow me to introduce myself. I am Kaumudi Goda, co chair for KeyNote Women Speakers Directory. I'm a lawyer by training and serve as a business advisor, human capital strategist, executive coach, international speaker, and trainer. I serve clients across United States, Europe, Asia Pac region, and Oceania. I'm currently pursuing doctoral research at the intersection of law and public policy, business, and people. I am passionate about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and sustainable development. I serve as a C suite advisor and on the boards of global organizations. I'm very excited about today's topic, and with me is Stacy Bernal, all the way from USA. Stacy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here with you. I am Stacy Bernal. I am actually one of the founders of the North American chapter of KeyNote Women Speakers. And coincidentally enough, part of the reason I found this organization, or thankfully it found me, is that I was in a place where I felt like I needed a group that was more like-minded, that had that energy that I was looking for and that I needed as a female keynote speaker. So I'm really glad that I connected, and now I'm a part of this amazing organization with all of you.
Lovely to have you, Stacy. One of the things that is currently at the top of my mind is the series of incidents against Asian women, primarily across the United States. How are you doing? And do you have any thoughts you'd like to share with us?
Thank you for asking how I'm doing. Well, the last year with the pandemic, we've seen an uptick in hate crimes against Asian Americans. And obviously what happened in Atlanta, Georgia, with the murders of 6 Asian women at Asian parlors, it is so, it's heartbreaking. It's absolutely heartbreaking. And to see stories every day, and they've been kind of quietly happening over the course of the last year. And I think this one just really drew so much attention because it is so horrendous, and it's kind of the pulling off of the band-aid of how bad things have been. So it's been a hard week. I'm part Filipino and Chinese, and so I've been internalizing a lot and having to do a lot of self-care to it's very easy to kind of fall down these holes of reading the stories and going into this really sad place. So it kind of fuels my fire to be vocal and to really join in what it is a fight. It's we've got to elevate the voices and fight against the hate. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at this past week and this past year.
Thank you, Stacey. And you're right about it being this past year, because intersectionality is such an important concept to understand. And you do straddle multiple identities, have insights, and are a part of different communities. And I know that in addition to a lot of the communities that are currently having deep conversations and trying to move the needle on diversity and inclusion, one other big piece that you also handle is diversity, neurodiversity. Yeah, I know you touch upon autism as well. So, in the
Yeah.
theme of intersectionality, what are your observations and current thoughts? BLM, now violence against Asians, living in the US. Would you like to share something with us?
Yeah, there is so much. Thank you for bringing that word intersectionality, because it's so true. And I think for many of us, we do kind of check off more than one box. And for me, and I address this in my TEDx talk, is growing up, I learned at a very early age that even just with my race, I'm biracial, and there wasn't really ever this place where I could fit in one box. And so I was in the one labeled other. And even growing up with that feeling of otherness, it really shapes your experiences and your worldview. So I've always kind of felt like I don't really know where I fit in. Where's my place? And then as a woman of color, especially here I live in Utah, which is probably one of the least diverse places in the United States. And I show up all the time in places where no one else in the room looks like me. And often I'm in a room full of a lot of men. So yes, I do feel that intersectionality that travels with me everywhere I go and in everything I do. And then I have an autistic son. And so that has really added a layer to how do I help create a world that is not only inclusive and kind and accepting, but a world that is safe, because he, as a developmentally disabled neurodiverse person, he faces a lot of challenges that neurotypical people don't. And one is that, if he ever has an interaction with law enforcement, that he is at a greater risk of it ending very badly for him. So that's something that, I worry about. I worry about all the time is he's almost 16, he's very big. And if he is having a sensory overload and someone doesn't recognize what that looks like to them, it could look like he's a crazy person or he's got, something going on that could look like a threat. And I know he's not a threat, but someone else who sees him wouldn't know that. And that's scary. Like I lose sleep over it at night. And it's part of the reason why I will continue to speak up about these topics, because it's not just about me, showing up as a woman. It's about how do I make the world a better place for my son and for other people who are like him.
That's just such a profound note to have in this conversation, because all of us carry what is a visible difference that we can see. So in your case, for instance, being biracial and having biracial identity in Utah would be a very obvious and visible thing you feel and experience every day. And then, of course, there are the invisible burdens that people cannot see. And one would be a parent of a neuroatypical, neurodivergent child. I was in a conversation yesterday, and it was a father of another autistic child, and he said if he could have 5 minutes where he got anything at all, Stacy, he said, I would like to communicate with my son and find out he's okay. Then I could die and I wouldn't care. I just need that 5 minutes. And so I feel as a parent that pangs so deeply. How can leaders and colleagues in the workplace support those folks right now who are experiencing trauma for any of these reasons we've discussed so far?
Yeah, I think the first thing is acknowledging that these events and these emotions and what we are going through, it is trauma. And we have to treat it as such. I was talking to someone the other day and saying that we've gone through collectively as a nation, but really globally, we have gone through a traumatic event with the pandemic. And for all of us, I mean, it's impacted us all. But certainly, when we talk about intersectionality, when we talk about marginalized groups, they have been disproportionately hurt by the pandemic. So I think as leaders, really being able to create that space and acknowledging and giving people that, we have to be able to address the mental health aspect of it, definitely.
Stacey, the point you made about global workplaces is a very relevant one. Most organizations have people from different parts of the world, and they have offices in different parts of the world, especially now work from home. The contexts vary. What advice do you have for leaders, people managers, team managers, colleagues all around the world? How can they bring in courageous, candid conversations on sensitive topics? Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, and it's so hard because we are in this remote space where this is pretty much how we're interacting now. But we do have to be very sensitive to cultural differences, to communication differences. How do people feel comfortable, even though we can be thousands and thousands of miles apart. How are we still able to connect? So there's a lot to overcome. And as far as leaders, I mean, it might be that they have a one-on-one rather than having great big, Zoom calls with tons of people on there, but being able to have one-on-one and checking in with their team. How are you doing? Where are you at, mentally, emotionally? What do you need? Figuring out how to really communicate best with them, because all of us come with these different lenses and perspectives. And so one size isn't going to fit all. We can't come in and assume that one person wants to be spoken to one way or treated one way. We really are going to have to ask specifically what each individual needs.
And what is your own relationship with events that organizations have? For instance, Black History Month events, or Women's Month events, or if they have ERGs. Given that you wear multiple hats, have multiple identities any given moment, and there's so many of us out there like that, what is your own relationship, and how can organizations be more sensitive and less tone deaf in some of these things? Like one appalling thing I came across, Stacy, was an organization offering makeup kits for International Women's Day, another offering workout sessions, and I was thinking, did you check in? Did you check in with your people if this is making?
Who thought of that? Well, here locally, we have a school that during Black History Month, some of the parents wanted to opt out of Black History Month. And the school said, well, they wanted to keep everyone happy. And so they said, okay, yeah, if you want to opt out, we will let you do that. It ended up making national news. It was a very big story. This is a school that's 4 miles from my house. And so of course, my community is talking about it. And it did become a conversation is, can you take that out of the curriculum? The reason we have Black History Month is because if we're not focusing on it this one particular month of the year, it's like we're not talking about it at all. And on the flip side of that, I did a diversity training on Friday for a room full of mostly white men. And it was probably one of the hardest presentations I ever did. But they were asking me questions like that. They were saying, why do we have these women's specific events and the Black History Month? And why don't we have just Caucasian holidays? And I honestly, I was shocked. It didn't, I guess, surprise me that they thought this way, but the fact that they said it, I'm like, you hear yourself? Think about the history of this country specifically. Everything that you've created is Caucasian. It's Caucasian history. We came over and pushed indigenous people out of this land and created this entire country to benefit white men who wanted land with no care for who it impacted. And that's hundreds and hundreds of years of how our country looks. And now they're not feeling like they're getting enough love because we don't have Caucasian History Month. In a perfect world, we wouldn't have to have these separate events. In a perfect world, women's history, Black history, it would be so common knowledge and we would know all of the names in history and all of the important people because they would just be a part of regular history. I had someone ask me that, when is there an even playing field? When do we get to that point? I don't know, but we're not there yet. And that's why we have to keep having these special celebrations for the marginalized communities who need them.
Absolutely, that's a powerful note. Someday in the future, we may not need these events. At the moment, they're important, and participating in them is important.
Yeah.
One observation I have is that especially global organizations do have to navigate that line so very carefully. On one hand, engaging in these conversations and providing safe space. On the other, within the demographics of their employees and leaders, you might have people who are hypersensitive and who will push back because it flips for them at some point. The conversation becomes so uncomfortable and so threatening to their own personal identities that there's a very strong pushback, and then organizations have to make those difficult calls, like the school you've mentioned. Faith, for example, is a very big topic. Ethnicity is another one. What advice do you have for your audience who's listening to you today who might identify with a non dominant segment, right? I'm a minority in some manner in my workplace. On one hand, being authentic and showing up the way that I most truly am is important. On the other, I always feel I'm a minority, like you did in that workshop you conducted with mostly white males. It doesn't feel safe to me. And there's so many different pushes and pulls. For those who are currently feeling like they are a minority, do you have any advice or insights to share?
Yeah, I know. I absolutely know how that feels. And I think of this often because I think of LGBTQ people are in that same boat, right? I mean, often women. And then again, when we start talking about intersectionality, so if you're talking about a Black woman who's LGBTQ, then she really kind of ticks off all these marks. And so I can imagine how scary and difficult that must be to go into a place knowing that you are probably significantly different than everyone else in that room. And how are you authentic and how can you present yourself and feel safe? So, my recommendation is to find allies in your workspace. And specifically, a lot of books I read talk about how we need the white man, we need the men to be the allies because they are often the ones in the positions of power. So if we can have someone that we know that they're somewhere high ranking, whether they're our boss, whether they're whatever position they are in, but if they're in a position that they can kind of protect us if we need to have that protection, that we can go to them. And again, I wish it wasn't necessarily that way. I wish I could say walk into your space and be your authentic self and embrace everything about you that's different and amazing, because I would love to see that. I would love to see, someone be openly gay, someone be whatever it is that they're scared, that they're intimidated to share with others. I would love for people to be able to just embrace their authentic selves, but we're at a point where people really are scared to show who they are. They do feel a need to just kind of keep their head down and be quiet and get their work done. And how do we fix that? Like, how can we create spaces where they feel safe? So I think it's, starting out finding allies in your environment, and hopefully with more training and more acceptance from organizations and leadership, because really these changes that need to take place in organizations, they really do have to start at the top. They have to start with leadership saying, these are our values, and then they have to walk the walk. They have to say, of course we value diversity, of course, whatever the goals are, but then back it up and live up to your word.
That's great advice, Stacy. Thank you so much. And as a matter of fact, that seems to be dilemma for a lot of organizations right now. The question of treating everybody fairly, freedom of speech, and allowing freedom of choice. Opt out if you want, opt in if you want. You're most entitled to have your views and say them out if you wish. That's that one, which is an important piece, and I acknowledge that we're very lucky to have these freedoms in the countries where we are in right now. On the other side is the matter of equity, acknowledging that there are historical disadvantages, there are historical harms, and that organizations, as you said, should courageously commit to righting some of those imbalances, those systemic problems, and fixing them. And in this debate between equality and equity, where you do take affirmative action, where you do take equal pay actions, you do reframe your recruitment promotion criteria, when organizations face pushback, if they are so talented and equal, why should women get these, quotas? Oh, she's a quota candidate, that's why she made it onto the board, right? What are your thoughts on this equality versus equity debate? And how do you advise your organizations that you consult with?
Yeah, that's such a good question, because there is this tightrope with affirmative action, because people feel like, oh, now you're going to take from me to give to others, and that person isn't necessarily deserving, but because they fill a quota or check off that certain box, that they're taking from me. And I think that is a hard one to get people on board with. No one wants to feel like they're going to lose out so that someone else benefits, but it does go back to a lot of, historically, who are the groups that have been marginalized, but not only, why are they in that position where they were disadvantaged? So for women, another great thing about living here in Utah is we have one of the worst gender wage gaps in the United States. And people will say, well, it's because women don't want to be doing they don't want that. They're not doing the same jobs. That's not the case. There are women who they do want those jobs. They go in and they're doing those jobs. But the mentality is that because they're not the breadwinner or they're not, the main moneymaker of a household, that they don't deserve to be compensated the same as men. I've had conversations with organizations that actually, pretty much said to me, like, that's why the guy would make more, was because he was the breadwinner. He had to make more. We need to, pay needs to be based on the job that's being done, regardless of the gender, the race, whoever is doing that job. But they're also, as far as getting that equity, there has been historically a lot of opportunity that hasn't been given to Black, Indigenous, people of color, opportunities that weren't given to women. So we're in a time now where we have to start leveling that playing field. And that's kind of I think the difference between equity and equality. So when I do my presentations, I actually have this visual, and it's a ladder. It's two ladders. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but it's one of the ladders has every rung there that it needs, and the other one has about every fifth rung. And it's that idea that, yes, it's going to the same place and it's the same distance, but this one is going to be so much harder to climb up the ladder because it has less rungs, because we've been given less resources to work with. So until we get down to the root cause of it to help fix the problem, yes, we do need to have these affirmative actions and creating the level playing field.
Spot on, Stacy. As a matter of fact, I'm fascinated by public policy and laws, and one of the things that I've been pondering also is, rather than look at it in a linear way, the way you would mention that some of the folks do, you're taking away from me to give to them. One powerful way to reframe the conversation would be to actually say, when you have greater diversity at the table, you're actually creating more values. There's more for you and more for me. We're expanding the pie. And it is so easy, isn't it, in these conversations to get distracted by our little storms in the teacup. I feel something's getting taken away from me. Therefore, I immediately other whoever is across the table. And I frame it as a aggressive, adversarial conversation. And it need not be. You can win, I can, we can all win. We can always get better, and we can together improve that ladder, make it an escalator, hopefully, for everybody.
Yes.
Stacy, looking ahead as we go back from COVID, lockdowns, working from home, remote working, which I've heard that been the toughest on the minorities, on those of us who are perhaps in the more vulnerable demographic, lower rungs of the career, essential workers, non-corporate workers, and we head back into workplaces. I see opportunity there because you can go back to the drawing board and make it again, but there's also so much of recovery needed because there's so many demographics who are adversely impacted. Looking ahead, what are your own thoughts? What do you hope for? And what's your advice to organizations, leaders, and human beings who are listening to you?
Yeah. So it's been interesting because I've been reading a bunch of different news stories about diversity and how the pandemic has kind of some of the pros and cons with what's been happening as far as the remote work and diversity. And I think there's a couple of things that have been, well, pretty disappointing and sad. And so, like we talked about earlier, is that our minority populations have been disproportionately hurt by the pandemic. And women have also been, so many women lost jobs, a year ago when we kind of went into this panic mode and we didn't know what was happening. And so women were some of the first ones to get the cut. So I read something on leanin.org that basically we've got now probably like 10 years worth that we're going to have to make up for to get women back to where they were, in 2020. It's going to take a long time to rebound to get women back in their positions of leadership, back into their careers. On the flip side of that, I read an article that said disabled people who have necessarily weren't able to work, commute physically to go to jobs, that being able to work remotely has actually been good for autistic people, for disabled people. And so in some ways, I know I'm like, well, that's a silver lining, but man, we're going to have a lot of lost ground that we need to make up. So I think, getting back into this in person, there's going to be a lot of work just to get back to like the social interactions, right? Like getting over like, oh, we're not just in these little rectangles anymore. Like we can actually be in a room full of people. So I think we're going to be kind of relearning a lot of communication. And I do think that with especially the social justice issues that we've seen over the last year, I think we're going to be having a lot more uncomfortable conversations, candid conversations. And I hope that a lot of people who have maybe been less vocal in the past, I'm hoping now that they're going to be willing to come to the table, that they're willing to start speaking up about, discrimination, any issues that they have had, that we're in a place now where we know it's happening. We've seen over the last year all of these problems. I think we need to really be addressing them. So that's my hope, is that we find that balance with restoring what we can with our women and our marginalized groups, and doing even better with furthering the conversation and pushing that needle.
That's a beautiful thought. And thank you so very much, Stacy, for spending this evening with us. I know we took up your dinner time with your kids. Really appreciate it. Please do take care of yourself. All of us are with you. We wish you strength and peace and healing. And I hope that things look up good for everybody very, very soon. Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you, Kaumudi.
If, like me, you can't get enough of Stacy, check out her book, Things We Don't Talk About. She's also got an incredible TEDx talk, The Confessions of a Recovering Nobody. If you'd like to hire Stacy, me, or any of our amazing speakers on diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, or the future of work, check us out at our website www.keynotewomen.com. KeyNote Women Speakers Directory is a global, purpose-driven organization with a mission to bring diversity to speaking stages all around the world. We do this through three things. One, we have an online directory where you can filter for speaker by region, domain expertise, even topic. Everything you could possibly need to find out about a speaker, you'll find on their keynote page. Two, we recognize the accomplishments of our incredible speakers through our various social media channels. Three, we do recognize that not everybody rolls out of bed ready for their keynote talk. So we develop the next generation of incredible speakers through our highly popular Keynote Speaker Training Program. Do reach out to us if you need a speaker for your organization or event, or if you feel you can support us and be an ally, or even better, if you're ready to take up our training program and join the ranks of keynote speakers.